Díochaíomh agus fáilte róh chuig Q&A bhí fiabhra. So welcome all to February's Q&A. And I'm glad to have you all here tonight with myself and Aisling. Gichfuil tú Aisling?
Go bra ní gur ansam, chuna tá chéin.
Canmhacar magad, go hanmha ar fad. Ítach ar fad. Agus an bhfuil galore ceistena agin tá orange wahas dócha. We have a good few questions this evening. Agus céad an céad ceann sin atá agin Aisling?
So tá an céad ceann tagcha ó Sasna. So Seamus from Sasna sent in a very short question, but very to the point. He said, is there a phonetic alphabet as Gaeilge? So as far as I'm aware, the Irish languages uses the IPA as well. The is it IPA, the phonetic alphabet? Yeah. And there's a very good website called fuamina.ie where they have a recording of different dialects and of people saying different words, and they have the phonemes underneath the words. So I'm not 100% sure about the alphabet that they use, but you can find all the phonemes for different words there, so it's very handy.
That's it. I'd recommend that website as well, fuamina.ie, and there's an accompanying book to it as well. But even just the website itself is very useful. Mm-hmm. Also, there's also I suppose if you're thinking of the phonetic alphabet as being like the NATO alphabet, you just use the NATO alphabet. But otherwise, there's also the Irish version of the alphabet, how to say it, how to read it aloud, for example, like how in English you say ABC, whereas in Irish there is the Gaelic version, which is ABK. And I will link a video in the blog post, which is in the description box below, and you'll be able to follow up on that. But it is called Aibítir na Gaeilge, and I'll just write that up here on the screen so that everyone can see it. Aibítir, which is the Irish for alphabet, na Gaeilge. But if you even just Google that, you will find that, which is simply, literally, the Irish alphabet, but you can hear how it's pronounced instead of saying ABC, ABK, and that can be helpful as well because it can change your concept of how the letters are pronounced, because some of the letters are quite different, or at least a little different from how they're pronounced in English, similar to how in French or German they're different from how we pronounce some of the letters in English. So that's something to that you might find helpful as well. Inter fad. Guma Martin Lenny. So let's continue on. So Aogán, it's an Austral, and Aogán. So in Australia, and his question is: during your time learning Irish, did you ever go to the Gaeltacht for an immersion experience? If so, what did you think of it, and did you enjoy it? Would you recommend it in a post-COVID-19 world? Agat. You're both amazing and inspiring teachers. Gur míl maith agad Aogán. Mar sin cén raibh gur bheith agat sin Aisling?
Yeah, well, gur míl maith agad Aogán, and yeah, it's always lovely to see your face on calls and to see you in the comments on Pubble. I definitely would recommend it, absolutely. I went to Irish college in secondary school, so that's something that teenagers do in Ireland when they're in secondary school. They go to the Gaeltacht and they go for 3 weeks to do a course. I don't know if I'd call that an immersion experience really, because there's so much messing and fun going on, but it was great crack. And then when I was in university, I did go on a few immersion courses kind of as part of the course. And I would 100% recommend. So the first one I went on was in Oileáin, which is in Waterford, and it was called Day and Scoil na Muin, and it's specifically aimed at people who are coming from abroad to learn Irish, and they might have learned it in classes online or whatever, and also adults in Ireland who might be going back and learning again. So that was wonderful. I think that's a week-long course. And then also in West Kerry, there's Gaeltacht Thuaisceart, and they do week-long courses as well, and they do different things, like they do courses in singing, they do courses in stories, I think, as well. So they have a lot of variety there, and it just allows you to put everything you've learned into practice and to live it and see the place where it's still alive and everything. So yeah, I would 110% recommend in a post C19 world. Cad Thuaisceart.
Oh, on Multi or Fad Aisling. So those were great. Those were great recommendations. So what I would recommend, well, the thing is, I suppose the nearest I've experienced to such an immersive experience was a translation and applied Irish course I did in Carna a few years back. And it was quite an intensive course in Irish grammar and translation techniques. And you can do such courses as well up in Aigis Gael. And you always hear, and I'll just give you the name of that there, Aigis Gael. So you always hear of Aigis Gael being highly praised. So it's surely a great place to go. So they have different types of courses up there, both in translation and on different topics. Really, you can get ones that are more creative, like that are more craft based. So it depends on what you're interested in. But in the case of the one I did, it was translation and applied Irish, and that mostly, of course, focused on translation and the written word and grammar. But it was very nice to have the opportunity to live in a very Irish speaking area. Carna is one of the strongest Irish speaking areas at the moment, as far as I know. And it was nice there to be able to go to the shop and speak Irish in the shop and hear Irish, and just people walking about speaking Irish to each other. The landlady, Benety, she spoke Irish. Went to the post office. You could do your business through Irish. So it was very nice. You'd go to the pub and most people are speaking Irish, and you know it was very nice. There was some events as well while I was there. There was just an ordinary Irish music event, and it was very nice. So it wasn't touristy or anything. It was really just for the locals mostly. But still, you know, it was mostly true Irish, practically all true Irish, and it was really lovely to be able to be in a truly immersive experience like that. So so it's very good if you get the chance to do it. Definitely, no matter the language you're learning, an immersive experience is definitely the best. And it's the same in Irish. So go to wherever, whatever it be it in a Gaeltacht or otherwise, go somewhere if you can where most of the people are speaking Irish. Of course, they're usually called Gaeltacht, so Gaeltacht. So that's how it is. But even if you can't manage to actually get to a Gaeltacht, if you go somewhere where there is like a group, let's say for example in Belfast, where there is a in Catru Gaeltacht, for example, like the Gaeltacht quarter. So there's lots of events there, and you just hear Irish all around you, stuff like that. So if you do, if you can't go to the actual Gaeltacht, that's definitely a good thing to do. It's the main thing, anyway, is to be immersed in it. That's very important.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd be surprised at how much you learn as well, and how much you kind of solidify when you're speaking it every day. Brilliant. So hopefully that answers your question, Aogán. So the next one then is from Geordie in Vancouver, and he says, my question is about diminutive names. It seems like adding "een" on the end of some masculine names makes them feminine. So like Garode, Garodine, Padraig, Pádraigín. But then on other names like Micheálín would be something like Mikey, or Seamusín would be something like Jimmy. So he says, would Saoirse be closer to Georgie or Georgina? Can any masculine names be made diminutive by adding "een", or would that automatically make them sound feminine? So Saoirse would be more like Georgie. Georgina, I suppose, might be Saoirse. That's also, yeah, Saoirse would probably be the closest to Georgina, because Saoirse is George in Irish. So there are some names where adding "een" makes it feminine, but I don't know if there's any rule around it. You might be able to add some clarity to that there, Siobhán, but I don't think there's any rhyme or reason as to why some names, when you add "een", it makes them the feminine version, and why others it just makes them a kind of a pet name. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. It does seem to be fairly at random, and some of them do seem to be kind of unisex even. So like it depends on context, I would say, as well. Like Pádraigín, if there's a small boy called Pádraig or Pádraig, it would be natural to call him Pádraigín. But then there's Pádraigín or Pádraigín, which is the woman's name, Patricia in English. So it does depend on context as well. Calling a grown man Pádraigín now doesn't make much sense, but if it's a small boy or something. When it comes to like it depends. Like Siobhán, I haven't really familiar with that name, to be honest. Now I just did a quick search of it, and I see where it's referred to in one place as Georgina, but I could easily see that being Georgie as a boy's name. But you're in English, Georgia, I think, could be a girl's name too. So I suppose that even adds to some confusion. And I suppose that's the thing about the diminutive in any language; it can often be both kind of like a unisex name, both a men's and a woman's name. Now, Micheline or Micheline or anything like that, Micheline, I've never heard that for a woman. Like, you've Michaela in English, but I've never heard Micheline used as a woman's name, only as a men's name. Like Mikey, how you wouldn't have I don't think you'd have a woman called Mikey. So I suppose, but then again, with these sort of diminutives and nicknames, you do have people called lots of different nicknames and stuff, and it can be quite confusing sometimes in English if it's a woman's name or a man's name. So it's kind of the same in Irish. Some are distinctly masculine, like Micheline, but there are others like Pádraigín, for example, and really who knows. With Shea Machine, definitely that's a boy, to be more precise, I would say. I don't know if you'd really call a grown man Shea Machine. I can't really imagine you would. But I suppose it depends on context, depends on a lot of things, but it depends on their name, really. That's the thing. Just I'd say to look into the name and see how it's used. If you're thinking of, let's say, Siobhán, for example, look it up, see who uses it. Do more men use it than women and stuff like that? I would say that it depends on the name itself. Oh, okay, come on. Martin, Bugamisharai. So let's see then. Tá céad cist eile ó Daniel í Sasana, agus an ciste tá ige ná. Are names for places outside of Ireland eclipsed in the same way as Irish place names when they are preceded by the relevant prepositions? I understand that Balliatlia becomes Imaliatlia, for example, in the sentence Tá mé Machoni Imaliatlia. Would it be Tá mé Machoni í Norm, though, for example, or Tá mé Machoni í Durham? Thank you very much indeed to everyone at Bitesize for all of your terrific work. Good míle maith, Daniel. Mar sin céir the thuairim sin inis, Aisling?
So it's a great question. It's a really, really good question. So as far as I'm aware, the rules around these things change a lot. The Caidán, the standard sometimes changes, but for this rule, if the name of the place doesn't exist in Irish, so for example, Durham, I don't think that there's an Irish version for that, then you would use in, I-N, and you wouldn't have to add a shevu or an uru. But then, for example, if the place name exists in Irish, so like Paris, Tá mé Machoni é Boris, you'd put the B there. But if the place name doesn't exist in Irish, so like Vancouver, Rennes, San Francisco, places like that, you just say in San Francisco, in whatever, and you don't need to add the uru or the shevu. That's the rule as it stands, as far as I understand anyway. Does that sound about right to you?
That sounds about right to me as well. So if it's like London, where there's an Irish spelling of London, so then you would say I London, which I'll write up now. And that's like this, so I London, and you can see how it's different from the English spelling. But if you, like, as you said there, Aisling had Vancouver, you would say in Vancouver, Tá mé Machoni in Vancouver. Unless, I suppose, I guess you could go either way if you spelt Vancouver in a very Irish manner or something. And sometimes some of them are uncertain, I guess, because sometimes there's like the most common or officially used place names in Irish are actually the English spellings or the foreign spellings. But there's also Irish versions. So I think what I'm thinking of now is Boston and Bostún. Now I'm not too sure which is the official version. I think Boston is the official version, but people often use Bostún as well. So in Boston, tá mé Mahoney in Boston, ach tá mé Mahoney Bostún. I would imagine that's. Have you ever heard that, Aisling?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the official one is there for, because I've heard both all.Right, and Bostún can also mean something else as well. So I think people sometimes, well, in Munster anyway, so I think people sometimes tend to veer away from that a bit, but I have definitely heard both kind of interchangeably. So I'm not sure what the official one is now according to the Caidan. But yeah, that's kind of it's an easy enough one. If your place name doesn't exist in Irish, you can just say in. Brilliant. Okay, so I think Daniel had another question then as well.
Yeah.
And he said, I would be interested to learn more about the history of the Irish language in diaspora communities outside of Ireland. From what I understand, Irish was widely spoken in Canada during the 19th century, for instance. Are there any resources which you might recommend for learning more about these topics? And thank you again for the great work. You're very welcome. And yeah, I think there still is a Gaeltacht in the east of Canada. I've never been there or spoken to anyone from there, so I'm not sure what it's like there now. But there is a fair bit written about that, and I've given two kind of resources here. So the first one is Gaeltacht Thuaisceart and Oileáin Vir, post-territorial Irishness and Canadian multiculturalism. So that talks a bit about the Irish language in Canada. And also the second one is language translation and the Irish theatre diaspora in Quebec. That doesn't reference Irish to the same degree, but they're both kind of academic-y. I don't know if you'd be able to get them online or in a library or in a shop or something. So, but I have seen books in the library in UCC about the Irish language in North America, and I tried to find it earlier and I couldn't find the name of it for the life of me, so I'll definitely keep digging and have a look. But there is a lot spoken, and I think that'll be something probably that there'll be more of in the future, you know, as Gaeilge still are continuing to immigrate and go different places. I think there'll be a lot of literature about that, so it's very, very interesting. But yeah, those two might be nice to kind of introduce you to Irish in Canada, if you can get your hands on them. But other than that, I'm not sure of any other resources. Actually, sorry, I'm just thinking now, but a lot of the autobiographies that were written in the 1900s by Gaeilge from the Gaeltacht, they often go to different places. So like Mike Deneen O'Shea is one that springs to mind. He's from West Kerry and he went to England and America, and he wrote an autobiography, and he speaks about that as well. There's loads and loads and loads of them, because it was very common during the 1900s for native speakers to write autobiographies, and a lot of them did end up going to the States or England, and they would speak about their experience as a Gaeilge in these places. So if you can look into that, that might be another resource for you. So I'm waffling because for the Siobhán that you have to do.
Oh, sin an smaoin of near smaoin mé sin. That's very good about the autobiographies, because I hadn't actually thought of that, but that's very true. Those are great insights into the lives of the Irish speaking diaspora. So that's very true. Aogán Tá, wasn't that the one that you wrote?
Yeah.
I'll just write that one there. But that's no, that's actually on the Leaving Cert syllabus. Some people might be doing that for the Leaving Cert. So it's a very interesting story that goes from his childhood up to the time that he was abroad, as you were saying, both England and America. And there are also others. Practically every autobiography, I would say, that has been written by a native Irish speaker has some sort of immigration story in it. I would definitely say so. Almost always. So that's always good to look into that. There's always very good stories in those books. Very good. And on what? So let's see then. So we've got another question here, Keistela. And my apologies if I mispronounce your name, but Ivo Vesili from Croatia. He asks, he says, it seems almost impossible to pronounce written texts unless you heard them before. I have a book for grammar I have a grammar book for school children, but it has no transcription on how to pronounce the words. Sometimes I think there are no rules on pronunciation. So that's a common misconception, and I can imagine how confusing it can be at first, definitely, because I always think that Irish is a bit like, well, Irish spelling is a bit like a code that needs to be broken. You need to know the code to break it, but then when you know the code, it's grand. But Aisling.
Definitely. And I think I definitely remember myself in school, you know, trying to read things or pronounce things and just looking at it and saying, how am I going to do this? Because there's all these H's and D's and B's and G's and everything. So I just want to say, actually, I can see some questions coming in live, and people are wondering. So we answer those at the end. Just the questions we answer first are the ones that get submitted through the blog post. So just for those that are watching and concerned, if we're not seeing the questions, we do see them and we will get to them. So don't worry about that. Yeah, with regard to pronunciation, we do have a very good crash course on pronunciation on Bitesize. So if you are completely new to it, it's a really good kind of comprehensive breakdown of all of the kind of parts of pronunciation and how you can put them together. So I really would recommend that. If you're not on Bitesize already, we do have a great crash course on it. And I know I sound like a broken record as well, but there are great resources for reading things where you can read the text and hear someone say it, and that really is such a good way to get the pronunciation into your head. If you're not sure of how to decode it yourself, if you can notice patterns on how people are saying things while you're listening and reading a text, it's really helpful. And yes, my classic example is Gaeltacht. It's very good. It's got loads of children's stories, poems, and loads of different other resources, and they all have a native speaker as well reading them out loud, so you can just sit there, read the story and listen to someone say it for you, and it's a really helpful resource. So I would highly recommend that. But you'll get there with pronunciation, don't worry, you will get there. Perfect. Okay, so when we go on to the next one, it's another question from Canada. So his name is Damien, and he says, would you please share your thoughts on the fáinne system of badges for Gaeilge in terms of its relevance historically versus today, and any connection to the Bitesize program? So the fáinne, or as far as I know, isn't very common anymore. I actually have one myself, but I don't wear it. It's not as common as it used to be. And I think it was, it started at the beginning of the Free State, and apparently the person who decided on the fáinne heard fishermen say, in Dingle, I think it was, Thuaisceart in a fáinne and son, meaning they're gone mad or something like that, because there was loads of energy and conversation going on among Gaeilge who are fishermen in Dingle, and he thought it was the perfect example of the energy of the Gaeilge, the spirit of the Gaeilge, and fáinne was what he decided on. But there wouldn't be any connection to it in the Bitesize program, but I think it is really nice, and you would still see some older speakers outside of the Gaeltacht that will wear the fáinne, and I think it's lovely. It'd be nice if it came back, but yeah, that's really all my knowledge on the fáinne. Do you have any more information?
As far as I know, when it comes to the fáinne, it's, as far as I know, there was an organisation called An Fáinne, which was established in 1916, and it had, there was also the Gaelic Writers, what was it, Society from a few years earlier than that again, and they were founded by Piers Baisley, and so that, I suppose, would have been the beginning of An Fáinne, and I hadn't known though about that connection with the fishermen. That's very interesting. I hadn't known that. I've heard of people in prison making themselves fáinne from like anything they could, any scraps or whatever they had in the prison cell, so to show that they were Irish speakers. But that's it. It like at the beginning, it was a much more, I suppose it was more esteemed because you actually had to do an exam to get, there was like an fáinne ór and fáinne agad, so like the golden one, the gold ring and the silver ring, so it's just like a little lapel badge. And but some of them were quite big, the earlier ones were quite large, and there was an exam to do, and that continued on. I'm not too sure when that ended exactly, but it was very important to us, or at least it was quite influential during, I suppose, the like from those years, like from about the time, I suppose, from about what time, well, like kind of that period of like 1916 up until like the early years of the Free State. It would have been quite quite an influential organization and just a symbol. But the symbol lasted for ages, and as you were saying there, Aisling, it's still there today, and you can still get it, but it's just not as hard to get today. You can just buy them. Like you don't need to do an exam, for example. But some people still use them just to show that they are Irish speakers. So someone will speak Irish to them, will know to speak Irish to them. So you still see some people, but it's not as common. But I suppose lapel badges aren't really as common anyway, whereas before, I guess they would have been more common. So I think that's one of the things, or at least culturally, I suppose, in Ireland today, it's not really that common to wear any sort of lapel badges showing anything about yourself. But it's still there, though. It's still there. You can buy them online. So if you search fáinne, and it's good if you go to, I would imagine, if you're going to any sort of let's say Fleadh or the like, because there you're showing people that you do speak Irish without having to go around and actually introduce yourself to everyone or something. You're showing that you're welcome to speak, that you welcome people speaking Irish to you. So I have seen it, particularly at some cultural events. I've seen people wearing an fáinne. So yeah, that's the story there. So it does have it does have, I suppose, definitely has a historical relevance that has died down over the years. Particularly, I would say, in the past few recent decades. But before that, it was different. But it's still there. It's still there anyway. And that's it. I hope that answers your question there, Damien. Come on. Agus tá cheiste lágin. Ó Fraser in Edinburgh. Agus an cheiste táige ná. I was hoping you could explain the phrase bhaint amach, meaning achieve. I understand the use of want in phrases like úsáid bhainteas, but I can't work out the logic of bhaint amach meaning to achieve. I know not everything has to translate perfectly to English, but I'm wondering if there is something I'm missing about this phrase. Thanks. An Kister Fad Fraser. So that's a great question. That's a great question. Oileáin Ragragat sin Aisling.
Níl éon ar dhearolalas a gomsa Mariola. I don't know anything about the background of bhaint amach, but bhaint is quite common in a lot of different kind of expressions, and bhaint is kind of usually to extract something, like rather bhaint, so, or to take it. So I don't know the background of any more to that. Do you, Siobhán? Do you have any more information on it?
That's a good question. There are various phrases where bhaint amach or bhaint amach is used. So you can also mean reach. Mm-hmm. For example, one which bailiat tlí amach, a tree at Lugger Magin, like we reach Dublin at 3 in the morning. so that's, I guess, the same. That's somehow connected to the phrase which would mean to achieve, because you've achieved it, you've reached it. So I suppose reaching, achieving. To take it out, a amach. I'm not sure of the logic. It makes sense in my brain, but it's very hard to explain it in English. So it's a bit like you've taken it out. It's like, I suppose, you've checked it off the list or something like that. Like you've done it. And I suppose you've got it out. I suppose it's a bit like in the sense if you're like came a amach, that's to get a degree, literally to extract a degree. And I guess in a sense you've made an effort to do this thing. And it's like, I suppose if you thought about it like this, if you imagined it like if something's, I don't know, something's stuck in the ground and you're pulling and pulling on it, and you have achieved your goal when you actually manage to pull it out. So I would imagine that you could think of it a bit like that. But when it comes to the actual historical etymology of this, I don't know, but there is logic to it in my brain anyway. I'm not sure if it's easy to kind of conceptualize for others, but I would want to pull it out, to get it out, to achieve, and to achieve or to reach, and that's it. That's it. So I hope that's helped you there, Fraser, to understand that phrase a little better.
That's exactly what I thought of as well when I was reading that question. I was thinking, I imagine someone pulling someone out or pulling something out of the ground, or exactly, the kind of physical effort of getting something out, and it's an achievement. So it could come from that. It could come from some agricultural background. But yeah, okay, brilliant. So we have our last question then that was submitted a bit earlier. And this comes from Peadh in Sassana, another Grow member. And he says, there are many words for four, such as the, or feadh, haghaidh, to name some. But can you briefly run through the explanations on when they should be used, and are they interchangeable? I have noticed that feadh is associated with time, such as feadh nóiméad, feadh cailcíse, but can other expressions for be used in this situation? Perfect. So, Siobhán, what would you say for that one?
Oh, it's a tough one. It's a long one. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to the whole thing of four, as we're very precise in Irish about which four we use. So, for example, do, there's the first one. So, if something is for someone, like you bought it for someone, you could use do. If, like I bought milk for my mother, you could do my water. That's all right. So kind of like on their behalf in a sense, but also for them. Like in that context, you'd also have do in the sense of like a book for children. So because it's for giving to them, I guess. So I guess you could ask yourself, can I give this thing to the person? Is it for them in the sense that I'm going to give it to them, or that I could give it to them? And so you could use do there. And it's also used a little bit more abstractly to mean for, in the sense of I paid him for the other person, kind of, or that sort of a thing. So sometimes it's used like that, to do something on someone else's behalf. But usually when we're talking about someone else's doing something on someone else's behalf, you'd say our son. That's usually what you'd say then, if you're doing something instead of someone else doing it. So let's say buying something on someone else's behalf rather than for them, but actually doing a task that they should be doing in a sense. So that's our son. But also that our son can also mean for someone's sake. So you often hear our son in the context, for example, of he died for a cause, or he, for example, in the case of he died for Ireland, our son na hÉireann, or he fought for Ireland, or something is for a cause, for the sake of that cause. So our son is also used in that sense of for, like in that sense of he died for Ireland, in that context. Then you've got a Oileáin Hampla agat an sin. Do you have any other example there, Aisling, of do or son?
I think they're great kind of context to put it in. And you know, if you have homework to do for the class, Gaeltacht Thuaisceart have done wrong, that's do as well, so for the class. but there are so many. I mean, there's like igor, haghaidh, son, da. The kind of easiest way, I think, to practice and learn, if you go onto folklore.ie and you type in the word for in English, FOR, there's a really, really comprehensive list of all of the types of for we have in English and examples in Irish. And it's honestly really, really good, because sometimes I kind of second doubt myself and I say, oh, would I use haghaidh there now, or igor, or what? And you kind of find yourself just overthinking it a bit. And if you go to folklore, they have loads of examples of all of them. There's like a list of 28 different examples, but there's pages and pages and pages of them. So it's honestly really, really good. If you want to type in a specific sentence, you might find it there. So, and from there, then you can kind of say, oh, right, okay, I understand why that for is used there and why it's not haghaidh or it's not igor or whatever. So that might sound like a very lazy answer, but it honestly is really, really helpful moving forward to kind of just solidify it in your head a bit. So yeah, that's my take on it.
And some of them are so interchangeable as well, like igor and haghaidh, I would say, are quite interchangeable. But our feadh isn't at all. Our feadh is like for a period of time. So often when you're learning these, don't just remember them as for, but rather like for a period of time. Like how I was saying about our son is for the sake of someone, for someone's sake or something like that. So our feadh, rather than just saying for, like I'll be there for an hour, or I was there for an hour or something. Say for the duration of an hour. So for the duration of something, that's kind of our feadh, or feadh, as you might pronounce it as well. And then haghaidh, that's more, people often think of that for the purpose of. So it's as we said, that was a great recommendation there of going to folklore, as they actually give those contexts. Like do, they actually say do, they have on behalf of somebody, and they give either daughter or son, and it's and they also give do as like indicating a recipient, as I was saying, someone you can give something to, but it could be on behalf of someone too. So you can see there it gives each context, like to protect someone for the purpose of something. That would be haghaidh, igor, fuchinne. Those are more, I would say, they depend a lot on the dialect. Like fuchinne, I would say, is more Ulster. Igor, I always think that is more of a Munster one. But I suppose igor and haghaidh, they're interchangeable there. Yeah. But that's the thing. But that's a great idea. Just to go and look at the, as you were saying, the 28 or so, or how many? It's actually 27, I think. 27 different definitions of for in English, and they like as I was saying, like for is in, they've just got so many, like wanting to do something, stating money, implied by, stating time of event, stating deadline. It's just, there's so many there. And so if you just look at that on folklore.ie, that'll really give you a good example, way better than what we can do in a few minutes.
Yeah.
That's it.
I
and
think
we'll put these links, we'll put these links in the blog post as well.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on something very interesting there, that in English we use the word for, but it's not for in Irish, it's something different. So if you can kind of disconnect the for and the Irish word and understand it for what the Irish word is. So feadh is not for, it's feadh. It means something different, you know. So if you can kind of learn that and appreciate the differences, that helps a lot as well. Okay, great. So will we have a look at some of the questions in the chat box here?
Brilliant. Yeah.
Great.
So let's see on what. So okay. Let's see. Owen Kishton Chin Takan Show bit le Michael Morgan. This one here. And how to say so I would imagine my take on that would be Mihal. Well, Aogán, I would imagine E is usually used for a woman now, or when you're talking about the family of someone. But if it's a man, it'd be more Aogán, so O and the father over it, Aogán. And there's a great site called slina.ie, and if you put in a surname there, it'll bring you to if you put in a surname, it'll probably recommend some version. So you can put in an English surname or an Irish surname and see what comes up. So judging from that, I would say exactly as it's written, E would have gone, but I would say there should be O would have gone. And there would probably be a feadh on the last A in the word. So yeah, good ma in cheist and sin Aisling.
Tá ceann ansa ó Aogán chomá, so há ceiste agam. How do the last names change with ni, e, and o? So it's kind of tying on to the question we just had there. If someone could explain why they change and how gurv me that. Okay, so great question. So ni en I feadh is usually for a woman who is not married, and it's actually short for inian, which is daughter of. So some of these kind of explanations are a little bit archaic, and the kind of lot of daughter of, woman of and things like that. So they're not maybe as progressive as we might like, but ni is inian, which is daughter of, and that's for a woman who's unmarried. And then we have the next one you mentioned is you, I, which is e, and that can be used in two instances. So it can be the genitive of o. So for example, as Siobhán said there a minute ago, the family of someone. So Winter E Chahán, for example, O Chahán would be the name, but then Winter E Chahán, it goes to the genitive. And then the O on its own is just the normal version of O. So if your name is Donovan O Donovan, Murphy O Murchu, things like that. So yeah, they change sometimes at the genitive, and also if the woman is married or not married, it changes then. Kind of like Miss and Mrs, ban and ni would kind of be a similar thing in Irish there. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers it a bit.
That's it. And there's a different version then if your surname is a mock surname. That's a bit different as well. In that case, I'll just write them up. You have Mhic, Vic, and of course Mach then for the men. So Mhic would be the maiden name, and Vic would be either the genitive. Well, it is the genitive, I guess, even because I suppose it comes, the long version is Ben Vic. So let's say Mara Ben Vic Cahan. Or not, we wouldn't say Macahan, but Mach, whatever surname. So Vic and of course Mach. So that's it. So that's why you say Vic for the woman, or Clan Vic, whatever. I cannot think of a Mach surname, but and then Mach is of course the man's name, be he the father of the house or a son or whatever, doesn't matter his age, but the Nic then shows marital status of the woman. So that's how it works. And also sometimes you see Vic as well if you're talking about like if it was something like Mr. Murphy's care or something, you could, or like Murphy's care or something, or that sort of a thing. So if it's possessive, so that's the idea with that's why they are written the way they are. Come on, so that's it. And O is I believe is an old Irish word for grandson, and Mach, of course, is son, and is still the word for son today. So that's why you have some surnames are O, some surnames are Mach, and I believe some surnames can even have an O version or a Mach version. So I suppose there's the same surname perhaps, but just one's the son, the other's the grandson.
Yeah.
Come on. Gan wahar fad. In cheist ille and sin.
See one here that's come in twice, so he might be really eager to find out our answers. So it's he says, which Irish dialect is the most difficult? And it's the last comment there. So I don't think there's really an answer to that, to be honest. I think it's all about the exposure you have to different dialects, and that makes it difficult for you. Someone from Connemara might not understand someone from the north if they've no exposure to it. So there's no right or wrong answer to that, in my opinion. Anyway, I think it's all about your exposure and which one you've heard the most, which one you've learned really. For me personally, I find Ulster Irish quite hard to understand sometimes, just because the way they speak is quite different to how things are written. Like words that end in EACH, they kind of add an or there. So like Oileácht or Oileácht would become Oileáin. They kind of add an or there, and sometimes that can throw me off a bit. But that's just because I have no really exposure to it, or I don't have any friends that speak Ulster Irish or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's all about personal exposure. Would you agree?
Oh, I agree there. I agree. There's no one in particular that's more difficult than the other. If you're used to, let's say, Ulster Irish, you'll be very used to it, or whichever one you learn. You'll find that the easiest, I guess, whichever you're most exposed to. I suppose, in a sense, if you were to make an argument, I guess you could say Ulster Irish for the reason that sometimes it's very different from Munster and Connacht Irish in certain ways, such as the pronunciation of the letter A or E, or whichever you want to call it. That can be quite different, and that can be a little bit confusing, I guess. But then again, like they're all interconnected, so it's hard to say if one. I suppose I think most people, they just find the other dialects that if they speak one dialect, they find the other ones tougher. So but there's no one dialect that's particularly difficult. They're all as easy or as difficult as the next, really. Come on. Agus tá cheist faoi Oileáin. So how easy do you think it would be to revive a lost dialect if there are recordings of the dialect and extensive literature from the area? For example, Oileáin in southeast Ulster. So do you have any experience of that? I know there's some, there's currently some attempts to revive the Irish from Oileáin or Oileáin English, but I'm not actually too well aware of the actual extent of those attempts. Do you have any knowledge of that, Aisling?
I know that in East Galway as well, there was some attempts to try and revive a dialect. I don't know how plausible it is, or yeah, it's a hard one. It's a much kind of broader and deeper question maybe than you can go into in a Q&A in a few minutes, because language it should be kind of natural, it should be natural enough. There shouldn't be a kind of real effort to preserve and force something if it's not there. And you've Irish popping up in places in Leinster, for example, in Kildare and in Wicklow and in Dublin, where there isn't really a dialect, and in maybe 50, 100 years, there might be a Dublin dialect and there might be a Leinster dialect. And that's the natural evolving of a language. And I don't know how healthy it is to kind of revive a dialect from a place. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think it's a much more complicated question than just simply kind of, I don't know. It's a hard one. I think. I think it's a lovely idea, because it would be awful if something was lost, forever and there was no trace of it. But I don't know if kind of forcing it back is a natural way to go with the language, if that makes sense. What do you think, Siobhán?
I think it depends in a sense on how it's done. Like if there are people like in the, like, let's say in the example given here, and they're in southeast Ulster and they already speak Irish, let's say they speak Irish, some let's say Donegal, Tír dialect. Well, they live there and they know about Oileáin and they know that the dialect's there, and they listen to all things like, oh, that's a lovely saying, I'm going to start saying that. Or, oh, look how they used to say, I read only the other day that they used to say go instead of co. Or maybe they would have pronounced it more like gay or something like that. I'm not too sure how they would have pronounced it exactly, but it was a G instead of a C anyway. So like if people started saying that, I think at first, I suppose it would depend, because people might be confused. Other speakers, fluent speakers, might be confused. But the thing is, the thing is, though, I can understand that completely, and I think that's lovely if people can piece together the dialect from their own area from recordings. But I think they'd have to be pretty proficient already in Irish to do that, and just really, instead of saying, let's say, like, I know in some places in Mayo they'd say an shao instead of an shaw, and so saying an shao instead of an shaw, or Ellie instead of Ella, and stuff like that. That's like, if you're, particularly if you're living in that area, but especially if you have a certain family tie to that area, it would be up to yourself, and I think it'd be lovely. But I suppose the thing is, it could easily cause confusion. But I guess there's so many dialects in Irish as there is. What's the harm? So I think I think it's a good idea, but I guess it depends on how one would do it. But if it was like some sort of like local organisation, which I believe there is, but I'm not too sure of how it is. But I believe there is for the Irish in that area. So if there is like a local group and they're like, let's research this. Let's say, all right, we're going to stop saying this. How about we say this? And that's it. And you're not going to shame people who pronounce words in a different way or something. If it was very tyrannical or something, that's a different idea. But I think if it's done correctly, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I believe something of that sort has been done with Manx Irish. I'm not sure how they've done that, but I know Manx has really risen from the ashes. So I guess whatever they've done seemed to have worked. So that could possibly be a way of doing that in Irish.
Yeah.
Come on. So come on, and it's feadh, that's true, all right. The Mayo dialects are influenced by Ulster Irish. That's the thing, I suppose. Like, there's so many similarities between Connacht Irish and Munster Irish, and like peculiar similarities that wouldn't be in Ulster, but then there's Ulster and Connacht, because similarities that wouldn't be in Munster, because it's all down to geography, really. That's the thing. Of course, the accents are going to be more similar in areas closer to each other. Come on, and Ian Canelachin. Thought there was an interesting one there at the end there about might Irish accents of Hiberno-English reflect Irish Gaelic dialects alive or not? It's a very good question. So do you have any thoughts on that, Aisling?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think definitely if you hear people from certain areas of Ireland speaking English, their accent might be so strong that you might think they're speaking Irish, especially in Gaeltacht areas. When they speak English, when they speak English, their English sounds almost like Irish. And there definitely is a connection there. And not even just in terms of accents, but in terms of vocabulary and in terms of syntax and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. The kind of, I live in Cork, and that kind of lilt that's always associated with Cork, the kind of sing-songy nature of it, that's in Cork Irish as well, so there's definitely a connection between the two. So yeah, what would you say to that, Siobhán?
Yeah, that's true. Like, definitely the Irish Gaelic dialects have affected Hiberno-English, definitely. And the other way around, I would say, in these days, I would say definitely it's happening that Hiberno-English is affecting Irish. I would say that there's definitely a close relationship between the two, because a lot of Hiberno-English is just a literal translation of Irish, and because and often there's just some phrases in Hiberno-English that would only make sense in Irish. When they're translated to Irish, do they only make any sort of logical sense? It's like there's a number of ones, but that are like that. But there's so it's definitely, I don't know if there's any studies running this or anything, but I'd imagine it'd be an extremely interesting study but it definitely sounds like it. There is a Hiberno-English dictionary, which is very interesting because it goes back to the etymology of it, and almost always it'll go back to the Irish, and it actually gives the Irish word, and it'll usually give the place as well where this phrase is used in Hiberno-English. So it's very interesting that you might have a phrase in Hiberno-English in one part of Ireland that let's say I wouldn't have, but I'd know the Irish for it. I'd know when it says, oh, this originates from, I'd know that, and probably any Irish speaker would know it, but it only survived in a non-Gaeltacht area in Hiberno-English, but I wouldn't use it in Hiberno-English, for example. I'd only use the Irish version, and the English version sounds strange because it's a literal translation. So it's very, very interesting. So there is, I think if you just Google Hiberno-English dictionary, you'll see. I think there was a recent reprint of the Hiberno-English dictionary. So it's very, very good. Very, very good. So Anwa and Anwa, and that's very interesting there. From Shorshaw Shea, who's saying there that he's never heard Shorsheen. So that's interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
That's it. It's always interesting to hear from someone who actually has the name, because it's such a, I suppose, a personal thing in a sense. A lot of these names, particularly diminutives and nicknames and the sort. What? And what her fad. And there's a photo. So there's a good recommendation here. It's just Sunday is fair. Yeah, you're the greatest dad.
That's perfect.
Is fair. Yeah. Come on. And Ryan Kish still on and Shin.
I'm feachant inis.
Another interesting point there about an ad being on the TV for the Fáinne in the 80s. Yeah. I'd say there's even been more recent television ads. I'm pretty sure I've seen some, at least on TG Cahir you might anyway. So it's still advertised. Just to a different extent, I suppose, and it has a different relevance. That's the main difference there. Come on. And
there's one here I found at the start. I'm trying to find it now again.
What? There's a good one, maybe about the months. Was that the one?
Yes, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Come on, Ankisht.
Yeah. I think I know Jim actually. I think I used to teach Jim. So hello. So yes. So the reason that some have an and not is based on their gender and the genitive. So, for example, me na nullig is feminine, and when we put it in the genitive, we have to use na instead of on. And then if it's masculine, it would be on. So me on mehiv is masculine, so we keep the on there. So it's very simply just to do with the gender of the month. They're not all the same.
And then as well, the etymology as well. There's about, I think you can break it down in halves. Like 6 months are very much from Latin, like Miul, Yule, July, and that doesn't have an on before it. Mianor does not have any definite article on or na as well, and that's January. That comes from Latin directly as well. And there is Fiaura. Now that one can have a definite article. There's me and Worth. So there are lots of these, like half and half pretty much. Ebron is apparently supposed to be like a half Latin, half Irish one. The first half of the word being Latin, the second half being Irish. So that comes into play as well, I would say, with that, like me beyond for, because it has, like, it's the middle of autumn or the middle of the harvest. So it has a particular meaning, whereas some of them are just really transliterations almost, or adaptations from Latin. So it would depend a lot. Nullig, of course, would have the same roots as the French Noël or the English word nativity. So it's interesting that nullig at the same time happened to become a feminine word in Irish. So it's interesting that, but I suppose that's the thing. But Miúil, since it's a Latin word, but I suppose there's no real. You can't just say, oh, this one's Latin, so therefore I won't have one. It's not really as simple as that either. So it depends. It depends on the particular month. So just to see a list of the months with me in front of it, and that'll help you. Come on. An bhfuil éon ciste linn sin ní ceap mé.
No.
Ní ceap mé, agus is tócha bhfuil an uair thart ar aon nás.
Yeah. Bhí go leor daoine ag féchant, so gur míle maith agaibh.
Gur míle maith agaibh, bhí si go deis si bheith bheith linn. So it was nice to have you with us, and I hope you had an enjoyable time, and also that you learned something. And the links that and the many things we touched on this evening will be in the blog post, and I'll put up a post on YouTube as well to say that has been published, so you might get a notification if you're subscribed to the Bitesize Irish YouTube channel. But keep an eye out on the blog anyway, it'll update very soon.
Gur míle maith agaibh. Slán liv.
Gur míle maith agaibh. Slán.
Slán a chuirde.